2E. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive meeting. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision will be made in executive session. At the end of the executive session, we will go to an open session and welcome the audience back into the room. So, I'm looking to Chuck to tell me when we're ready to go. Now. Okay. Growth boundary recommendations. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and the team is now coming in to provide that presentation. You're up.
Transition.
Yeah.
At least that's what he told me. I haven't Phoenix.
You need a chair?
Yeah. Bring one up?
Yeah.
Robin, got one.
Okay.
Welcome. Thank you. Whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, John. Just quick heads up that, or a reminder, I guess, that what we're talking about today is just the jobs, parks and schools, part of the recommendation. I think that was pretty clear already, but I just wanted to reiterate that and let you know that we are working very, very hard on the residential UGB recommendation, and we'll be back to you as soon as we can with more information about that. So with that, I will let Terry get rolling.
Okay. Thank you, Robin. Great. So today's presentation builds on the one we gave to you in December about jobs, parks, and schools, and it adds what we've heard from the community since that time. The recommendation for expansion sites for jobs, parks, and schools remains the same as you saw in December. So I'll walk you quickly through each land category, tell you what we've heard about each of these topics, including some themes in the public input, and then outline the next steps in your decision making. These are some of the public input opportunities we've had over the last month. We've heard from people through an open house, an online survey, the results of which are summarized in your packet, and the complete report is available on the website. We had the public forum last week before you, and we've been meeting with people individually and receiving emails, responding to emails, and making group presentations. The response has been pretty great, and people seem really happy to share with us their thoughts about this pretty big community decision. As a reminder, we're planning for nearly 36,000 new jobs in our community over the next 20 years, and they're a key component of our economic prosperity. The good news is that most of the jobs we need to accommodate can fit on existing lands inside our urban growth boundary, on vacant land, through brownfield redevelopment and other types of redevelopment, and as a result of the efficiency measures to our land use code that you adopted last year. The remaining land need for about 3,000 jobs will require the UGB expansion. We still face high unemployment and lower than average wages in Eugene, and there's a real need in our community to help people improve their economic stability and grow our collective prosperity. Thankfully, there are actions the city can take to help with this. The main thing we can do is provide enough land for local businesses to grow onto and new businesses to join our community. We have the opportunity now to provide the needed supply of sites for job growth in line with our vision and our community goals. These are some of the businesses that we find likely to locate on the new land we would add to our UGB. Business types that are growing and likely to want to locate in Eugene include different types of manufacturing, food and beverages, advanced manufacturing and wood products in particular, and biomedical and environmental services. In addition, some companies might choose to locate in the area near the airport because of its proximity to the airport, and corporate offices or regional headquarters are likely to find a new master planned employment center to be an attractive place. You might recall that sites all around the urban growth boundary were evaluated to see if they could meet our need for jobs. The sites need to be not in public ownership, over 10 acres in size, relatively flat, with minimal floodplain and cost efficient to serve. The Clear Lake area is really the only area that meets all of these criteria. Land around the south of the city is too sloped and the parcels are too small, and land near the confluence of the rivers is too wet and constrained by floodplain. So we zeroed in on the Clear Lake area for all of those reasons. Given this careful examination of lands around the UGB, Clear Lake Road is the recommended site for the expansion. And given the goals of Envision Eugene and your previous direction on jobs, along with what we've heard, we recommend adding this land for over 3,000 office and manufacturing jobs in Bethel as part of a larger neighborhood that will be master planned to meet our best outcomes for the community. Our analysis shows we can fit our needed 11 sites here on about 455 buildable acres of land. The balance of the jobs land, about 193 acres, will be devoted to floodplain and wetland protection and an area-wide green infrastructure system. In addition to the location of the jobs expansion, our recommendation includes addressing environmental justice and compatibility issues as part of the adoption package. There is work ahead of us in drafting regulations that specify what types of industry is allowable in what locations and through what land use process. Our partner agencies and organizations such as LRAPA, Lane County Public Health, and Beyond Toxics are critical resources in creating a package for your review that can meet our triple bottom line goals. We'll also be developing protections for the large lots that would come into the UGB. This is another critical component of the adoption package that we'll develop and then bring to you for your review. And lastly, we recommend continuing the master planning and green infrastructure work, focusing on the wetland and floodplain resources with our state agency partners, and then planning for the infrastructure extension through the capital improvements planning process. Overall, we've heard support for the jobs proposal, support for locating the employment land near the airport and near existing jobs, support for integrating our stormwater and wetlands into the overall plan, and then support for collaborating with our agency and community partners on this work as we move forward. We've also heard concerns, and some of the themes that have emerged were around loss of farmland, wetland impacts and development feasibility, and impacts from industrial uses. First of all, the concern about loss of farmland. We share these concerns, and we assure you we would not be proposing expanding onto farmland if we had other options. The Clear Lake area does contain high-value soils along with lower value soils, and we've done our best to find other sites that would meet the needs and follow your direction. There simply are none. If we have to grow onto farmland, this is the best place to do it, between the airport and existing industrial development. This recommendation strives to balance the trade-offs inherent in managing growth in a way that supports our 7 pillars. In terms of the wetland impacts, these have been mentioned as well. We began inventorying these wetland resources and assessing them in 2011, and we can definitely say that this area is wet. and it will require a coordinated stormwater management and plan for the whole area. We've also learned about the quality of the wetlands, which have mostly been farmed for years relative to those being protected in the West Eugene Wetlands Plan. Most of the wetlands in the Clear Lake area they don't meet the criteria of protection under the West Eugene Wetlands standards. And that's according to both our natural resources staff for the City of Eugene and our wetland consultants. State agency talks are also underway to pursue a coordinated wetland planning, mitigation bank, and economic development strategy for this area. And again, there are trade-offs with this recommendation and feel that we've landed in a reasonable place given our identified needs and the Council's previous direction. Lastly, we've heard concerns about adding more industrial uses in Northwest Eugene. These are very valid concerns, and we're in active conversations with stakeholders working on these issues. We do believe there's a way to address them through limiting the location of certain uses in our land use code and piloting new tools such as the health impact assessments with Lane County Public Health. We recognize this as a challenge and above all need our stakeholders to help us design a package of regulations and strategies to address them. Through this iterative process, we will move this conversation forward towards meeting our collective goals. Moving on to parks and schools. In Santa Clara, the proposal is for a community park of 35 acres. And this is an underserved part of the city that does not currently have a community park. We've heard nothing but love for this proposal, and it enjoys widespread community support. Over in Bethel, the proposal includes Golden Gardens Community Park, which is a 222-acre city-owned property, and again, widespread support for this proposal. For the Bethel School District, 54 acres are proposed for the school's 20-year school needs. Public reaction to this proposal has been very positive as well, especially as people learn how this site fits into the overall district inventory of school sites. So overall, we've heard very positive feedback from everyone on the Parks and Schools proposal, and especially an appreciation for planning parks and schools together and in coordination with other components of a complete neighborhood, such as housing, commercial services, and jobs. For jobs, parks, and schools, the next steps will be to seek your direction on preparing the UGB adoption package. The package will include these components: comprehensive plan designations and policies, zone changes and code amendments, including a Clear Lake overlay zone, amendments to the transportation plan and the public facilities plan, and a package of legal findings and technical appendices. You will see and review all of these components as part of the formal UGB adoption package. To summarize, the recommendation for jobs, parks, and schools includes the Clear Lake area and the Santa Clara at the top of the map here. And I have some next steps for you on this slide. We're here at the work session on the 28th. We have some next steps on residential here yet to be scheduled under the direction column, and then we'll move into the formal adoption process following that. There is a suggested motion in your packet for jobs, parks, and schools, and we also plan to come back, as I said, with more information on our residential recommendation. Thank you for your attention, but I have one more thing, which is Bill Randall, our Planning Commission Chair, has a few words to say.
Thank you, Terry. And I'd like to also thank the Mayor and the Council for, again, allowing me this opportunity to share with you the Planning Commission's role in the adoption process of the UGB discussion related to jobs, parks, and schools. The Planning Commission has had numerous work sessions, and various members have participated in the public forums and the technical resource group discussing each area of need as our community grows over the next 20 years. Regarding the Parks and Schools expansion, the Santa Clara area is noticeably underserved by parks, and adding parkland and a school site in Bethel will provide education and community opportunities to this neighborhood. And as with any good idea, there are often challenges, and the jobs portion of this proposed expansion is really no exception. As Terry mentioned, there are concerns about expanding onto farmland and the impact on wetlands. We recognize those concerns and feel the recommendation before you is reasonably crafted and thoughtful. I also remember sitting in the audience in the McNutt Room when our city manager presented Envision Eugene's pillars to council. And at that time, he said, in essence, that while there are and will be challenges and concerns, overall, Envision Eugene's goals are designed to achieve a balance in our community. And that concept of balance has stuck with me personally since that time. And with each and every recommendation that has come before me as a planning commissioner, I've tried to look at that with the filter of balance. How does the recommendation serve the needs of our entire community? How do we accommodate the growth in our community that is coming in the next 20 years and accommodate it in an orderly way? How will the recommendation address all three aspects of the triple bottom line related to the environment, the economy, and equity for all in our community? And I keep coming back to balance. I commend staff and the various subcommittees that have investigated and vetted an incredible amount of information. I believe they've done it well. And as we further refine those expansion areas, the Planning Commission is looking forward to our role in all of this and putting together the implementation tools that we will need to grow intelligently. We are looking forward to continuing this and helping our community accomplish our goals with Envision Eugene. And again, thank you for this opportunity to share with you. Appreciate it.
Anything? So remind me, did we actually do a TBL analysis of this?
We worked with the subcommittee of the Planning and Sustainability Commissions and neighborhood representatives to talk about environmental justice, environmental resources, and things. We didn't use the tool per se for this analysis, but went through the same kind of issues analysis.
Okay. All right, I've got George Poling, Mike and Claire in the queue, and George Brown. Okay, George Poling.
Actually, Mike was first. I was trying to get your attention as well as get into the queue, so I'll let Mike go first.
Okay.
Thank you. Can I borrow your laser pointer, please?
Sure, it's the red button.
All right.
Take a microphone with you.
Yeah.
See how this works. Okay, my first question is, are we, when it comes to consideration for new parks, are we bound at an upper limit by something if we have an opportunity to bring something inside the UGB that makes sense for us to do so, or we thought would be a good idea? What binds us from doing so if we, other than, I mean, is there a calculation? What's our constraint?
There's not a calculation. The parks being proposed to be brought in are based on the fact that they're included in our parks project plan. Not sure of the title of that plan, but they've been identified as needs for those portions of the community in an adopted plan.
Okay. And here's why. One of the things that's very interesting to me, was brought to my attention recently, is that this area right here is in the dead center of North Eugene. It's right at the intersection of where Delta and Beltline are right there, and it's right next to the Home Depot and the Market of Choice and all the, I mean, it's a very well-built area. And there's a good number of acres right there along the bank of the river that are outside the UGB. We've been trying to acquire that property, as I understand it, or we have an interest, and that would make what could become, it's the old space of Eugene Sand and Gravel, and would make for what could be like our current Alton Baker Park, built on an old Eugene Sand and Gravel lot, could become a similar type of park in North Eugene along the river someday. Why would we not bring that inside the UGB during this process?
There's nothing stopping us from doing that in the future. I'll first say that. I know there's a lot of interest in that property, and there's various reasons you would bring parkland into the urban growth boundary. We own a lot of riverfront land that isn't in the urban growth boundary and doesn't need to be. But if there were a need for it to come in, there are a couple steps that would have to happen first before we would recognize it as a piece of parkland that meets our need. How we've established need right now is property that's in that plan.
So that's essentially the answer to my question. We're constrained by the capacity to prove need?
I think that's fair.
Okay. Could you put this back to the Santa Clara Community Park slide?
Oh, sure.
For me?
You have my clicker, though.
Okay, I don't know how to do that. I suppose I could have just
It's
hit the
not that
minus
far
sign there
back.
and figured it out.
There you go.
The dotted line proceeds south from the recently acquired piece on the left down to the piece just acquired and proceeds to the right there, proceeds east. That corner piece, as I understand it, is something that we're interested in acquiring to make a complete Santa Clara Community Park. Why would we not put that? Why would we not consider that for the expansion of the UGB as well, as long as we're at it and we're interested in acquiring it and it's what we need to make the park whole?
I haven't heard about that yet, so I can't give you detailed information, but to say that Parks staff asked us to include the piece that we added. So once they acquired it, they asked us to
Those
include
two
this
pieces,
one.
yeah.
So this one's been owned for longer,
Right?
and this piece was acquired last year.
Right?
And at that time, the Parks Department made a request to the Planning Department to include this in the UGB package going forward.
My understanding in working with, literally, this was my predecessor. This was his big thing. He passed on to me and said, "Get this done somehow." You know? I've been working on this for 8 years with neighborhood folks and with staff, and we've talked many times about that other corner piece there being a part of completing what is a desired 40-acre size for a community park.
I think you have an answer here, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer, Carolyn Burke, I think, could have some information added to this. She's been working, and is actually just now starting on working on overall parks plan. It might shed some light on your question.
Do we have the option to add that during council's process?
Carolyn's going to come up here.
Hello. What I can tell you is that the areas that Parks has asked planning to bring into the UGB, Parks has actually been successful in acquiring. So we have that knowledge that this will be used for park property. The areas that we're still working on acquiring, there's still a lot of questions out there. And if we were to bring something in that we didn't actually own as parks, we couldn't guarantee that it was going to be used for that purpose, therefore leading to the problem of how do we justify bringing it in. So there's a chicken and an egg issue here.
I've run out of time, but I'll need another round if you would, Mayor. Thank you, Karen.
George?
Thank you. Again, thanks to staff and Planning Commission and all the people in our community that have gotten involved in this discussion. And I particularly appreciate your balanced approach to reasoning on this. It makes a lot of sense the way you approach it. As far as the industrial area is concerned, we're required by law to maintain a certain amount of buildable lands, and it made a lot of sense, the steps that we went through to come up with this area. And if not there, where we're going to do it. We're required to do it. So I think taking into consideration what's already out there, the fact that we're already talking about restricting the belching smokestack type industry from going out there, I think we've taken really appropriate steps to address that. I am a little concerned about the Eugene Sand and Gravel area. I remember back in the 90s standing on some of the levees by the pits with County Commissioner Bobby Green, the Sheriff McManus, and Lee Babb, one of the owners at that time. And during the floods, watching chunks of earth the size of school buses fall off into those pits. Fortunately, those pits were there. It saved the Santa Clara neighborhood from flooding, but I am concerned about that being in the flood area and what could possibly occur. As far as the schools and parks, I think we've identified the right areas because of the current, I mean, it's only logical because of the current growth as well as demand and need. I think those are the appropriate areas that we start looking at, and I'm more interested in hearing more information about the that one piece of property up there at the Santa Clara area.
Claire?
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation and for the hard work that's gone into this. I especially appreciate the comments from the chair of the Planning Commission around the challenges between meeting our state mandates and having the challenge of balancing that against the desire to preserve our important agricultural land. And, you know, we did get some emails from folks out in that area who farm out in that area, and I just want to remind us that farming and related industries also don't necessarily create lots of jobs, but they are part of our industrial landscape and our job landscape. So one question that I had that I've heard from some folks in the community is, in terms of the amount of capacity we need for industrial lands, there's all sorts of process going on in the region, and I've heard folks express a concern that we might be creating excess capacity if all of us add many, many acres of land to create more industrial sites. And so I'd wonder if you could respond to that.
Sure. I've heard that too, although I haven't seen the analysis yet. What I can say is that under HB 3337, we're required to look at our own inventory separately, and so that's the short answer. But we do have a regional economic approach, and we share targeted industries, we share goals with Springfield and Lane County, and so my hope is that as each jurisdiction moves forward with their planning, that we coordinate that and have some strategies that recognize the attributes of the different areas, because they will be different.
Right. And then kind of the counterpoint to that, I appreciate the thoughtfulness and what will come later in the work around protections of the wetlands, which is very important. And also you offered the idea of a strategy could be restrictions on what might be built in those industrial areas to deal with the environmental justice issue. I think the counterpoint is, do we risk limiting our capacity by those restrictions and falling short of the goals for how many jobs we want to create? So I'm assuming you've been thinking about that as well.
Yeah, it is a challenge, but again, coming back to balance, I think that's the challenge, and we want to take it on and adopt overlay standards that make sense to put in place the protections we need and still get the jobs that we want. So that's our approach, is trying to go after all of the best outcomes and work with people.
Great. And then I wondered if, since the preservation of farmland is a really important value, I think, for many folks in our community and Lane County, how much farmland do we are we going to be losing with this proposal? And also, would the parks and schools parcels take away any viable farmland?
Most of the area is in grass seed or hay production in the Clear Lake area, and the total's 924 acres. Santa Clara Park is a mixture of rural residential and farming, and if you add that piece in, we're at 958. So as far as the acreage, that's what we would be converting to urban uses by expanding the UGB.
So I think it's important just for us to be clear about that, so folks don't think we're trying to hide some piece of information that they're not going to like. I agree it is a balancing act, and you know, sometimes you make the least worst choice in terms of where you end up with some of these things. I guess in relation to two things. One, I happen to have a friend who works at the air traffic control tower at the Eugene Airport, and he just raised a concern around a school being located off the end of a runway. And so just as we go forward with these plans, I think we need to think about possible conflicts with airport operations. They're limiting the use of one runway, as I understand, at certain times, and so we do want to think about who we're putting in the path of our airport as we build there. And I'll take a second round.
Great. All right, George around.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I think adding the parks section is totally non-controversial. These areas are, if anything, underserved and need more parkland. Don't have any kind of problem with that. The school, it's already government land. The school can go there. I think that's pretty non-controversial. The part I will not support is the industrial expansion onto the farmland for two main reasons. And we've discussed it before. I can just, in no way can I support covering up Class 1 and Class 2 soils. It works directly. Once you do that, you never get them back. To try to recreate that somewhere else on a brownfield, you're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars to try to recreate productive farmland that you've removed from production. So I will, and it works directly against our goal of trying to have, a dependable regional food supply and local food supply. Also, there's I think a pretty big-time social equity problem here, putting factories in an area that's already has much more than its fair share of dangerous emissions, industrial emissions. To increase that is unconscionable, I think. It's just the wrong thing to do. And I heard the plan of okay, but at the north end we'll have, the more toxic things up here, because people live down here, and we'll step it down to cleaner uses the closer you get to the neighborhoods. Well, that's fine, but there's the wind. The wind blows. You're adding to the already a polluted airshed, and the wind moves it all around and blows it right into the neighborhood. So it's just a bad idea. This is an area where we say, okay, this is the only place that we can do this. But what we could tell the LCD is, but we're not going to do it. We're going to work with our regional partners, and we're going to develop industrial land elsewhere, and it may not even be in Eugene. It may be in Springfield, it may be in Goshen, it may be in Coburg. But this is an unsuitable place for industrial expansion, in my view. And let's see. So I won't support that part of it. There's also kind of a competitive disadvantage, actually, with sites that are close to I-5, because this is a fair distance. This is like a little over 7 miles from I-5, whereas it's my understanding that most big concerns want to be 5 miles or less than a major transportation corridor. And you get a lot of activity out there. It's going to add a huge amount of traffic volume to an already overburdened Beltline highway, so we got to think about that too. I'll probably need another round.
Probably we're going to not get through another round for everybody because of the time. Alan?
Yeah, thanks for all the hard work that we've put into all of this and all the people that have commented on it. I'll point out there was a packet in your packet, a memo from the Sustainability Commission, and part of that on page 1 addresses their concerns about the TBL and the recommendation and that conflict that they see. On page 2, talks about the jobs area and mentions approaches of dealing with the concerns about the social equity issues in particular, which I share. And in the middle of the page 2, it talks about tools that we can use that I would like you to address. The buffer zones, overlay zones, taking into account cumulative air pollution and encouraging certain types of industry over others. I'd like you to, if you could put up that slide, talk about how we might incorporate better buffer zones and what the rules would be around the overlay zones on air pollution and what that campus would mean and what kind of industries could go into that area versus not. And the concern there is being more polluting type of industries. There is a social equity and environmental justice issue around this area that's heavily industrialized, and putting more into it, more industry that may be polluting but may not be, depending on what kind of industries we encourage and how that impacts the local community.
asking that?
Yes, there was a lot in that. I'm trying to take notes a little bit. First, yes, the Sustainability Commission's concerns are spot on, and things that we're thinking about in the subcommittee meetings around this topic. Buffer zones, absolutely. Overlay zone, yes. Things that we can establish actual siting standards for certain uses fairly easily within our land use code. In terms of the cumulative air pollution, this is a difficult one, and one that we're trying to work with LRAPA on to find an appropriate tool. There aren't any obvious ones, but it is definitely something that we need to keep working on with LRAPA and with the EPA as well.
Because we don't have jurisdiction over that. That's LRAPA's jurisdiction.
They issue the permits.
And
That's
they
right.
have they ever done a cumulative air impact shed?
They've done air shed monitoring and compared it to South Eugene, for example. Some of that's attached to the environmental justice issue paper that we have online. So you can get a sense of comparative air quality in two parts of Eugene. Yeah, so some of that is available.
You create an land use overlay zone that incorporates cumulative air impacts that may put constraints on how things get developed and where?
We probably can. What we're trying to do is have it be the right tool in the right place. So I think some things will end up being in the land use code, and that's where they belong. And other things will end up being ways that we work with LRAPA and share information and do health impact assessments with the neighborhoods and with the groups like Beyond Toxics that are already doing this kind of work. So I think it's going to take more than just regulations to really get at that.
So we're not going to know that stuff until after we approve the UGB expansion?
No, we will know it as much as we can with the adoption package. We will bring you the overlay zone and whatever other strategies we're proposing as part of this expansion.
Yeah, because I think the buffer zones, the overlay zones, and the last part about the campus and what kind of are going to be real critical for my support in this particular area. Can you address that last one about the types of industries in the campus industrial area?
Sure. Okay, the campus industrial. So you wanted the map of the area? There we go. So campus industrial is proposed for south of Clear Lake Road, and this is similar to the zoning out on Chad Drive. And so the zoning was rewritten in May to be campus employment rather than campus industrial, and it's because it puts more of an emphasis on office uses. And it also adds food and beverage manufacturing and two other types of manufacturing to that zone. So we would expect to see food and beverage. If you think of Chad Drive, there's publishing, there's communications offices, there's St. Vincent de Paul, there's banks, those kinds of things.
Are there outright restrictions of types of industries that cannot go into a campus industrial?
Absolutely, yes.
Can you name a few off the top of your head?
Oh, sure. Wood products are not allowed. Metals and chemicals, none of that stuff is allowed in the campus employment zone.
Yeah, but it's not directly related to how much air pollution they create, but it's somewhat.
Right. So
type of
that's one of the interesting things. We don't go so far in our land use code, except for one example I'll tell you about in just a second, as to get into the regulation of air pollution permits because they're handled by LRAPA. We do have some performance standards in our commercial zone regarding manufacturing. So there's an existing example of something that we could adopt as a performance standard in this area related to the impacts of manufacturing, for example. So in the existing, I believe it's C2 zone, there are performance standards allowing only a few types of manufacturing and under certain conditions. It limits the size of the manufacturing operation. It will not allow the use if it requires a permit from LRAPA. And there's a third thing. The third thing might just be that it's limited to certain uses.
I share the concern about the farmlands. Can you get us a map that shows where the farmlands are and what kind of class 1 soils? Where
I'm glad you asked that because I brought that map.
Oh, you did.
At the very end, I'll have to bear with me for a second here. Okay. So hard to read at this scale, but the darkest green here near the river is the Class 1. And here's our expansion area over here. So there's pockets of Class 1. You can see the dark green. And then the medium green are Class 2. And then the lime green is Class 4.
What happened to 3?
There aren't any 3 in that area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you get a more detailed map to us to look at that in the future?
Sure.
And finally, what prevents the, and I'll need another round if we do it, what prevents future councils from chunking up the large lots? I understand the need for the large lots for industrial purposes and support that, but what prevents the future councils from chunking that back down to smaller lots and doing away with what we're intending here?
Sure. So to protect the large lots and really to get them, this UGB expansion area adopted, we'll have to have large lot protections in our land use code, and also in our comprehensive plan, we'll have to have policies that address this and the reasoning behind the UGB expansion. So there's 2 things, code amendments and plan amendments that theoretically could be changed by future councils, but would also be subject to appeal and state acknowledgement.
And public hearings and
Absolutely.
public discussion.
Okay. Chris?
Thank you. I just was curious. I wanted to kind of get some clarification for a second about what is our capability to reinterpret or selectively comply with state laws regarding 3337 and what we need to do around buildable lands. Maybe it's for you. Maybe this might be for Glenn.
Oh, it might be for Glenn.
Because a couple of questions have been raised, a couple of interests have been mentioned that I'm wondering if they do have an implication at the state level. For example, the ability to just say no. What is our capability as a metropolitan area to say, the state law requires us to do this, and we don't want to do it. We're just going to say no. We'll come up with some other creative way to do it, but as far as the land use law says, we just say no. Can we do that?
A couple answers to that question. State law requires us to go through the process you're currently going through, to have the 20-year supply. And if we determine there is a need and that we just aren't going to meet that need by providing for a 20-year supply, what you adopt, DLCD will not support, and they'll tell LCDC, well, they'll advise LCDC to reject it, in which case we'll be out of compliance. Ultimately, LCDC has the ability to enter into or to issue an enforcement order telling us do this or else. As to what that or else might be, I'd rather have Emily address that for you in a memo that we could get for you. Other potential implications is if you're out of compliance, there's the possibility that as entities come to you for, or come to the city for rezonings, comp plan changes, any of that stuff, we're not meeting our obligations under state planning rules and guidelines, and that gives people the opportunity to appeal the applications that we're trying to approve. So if you didn't do it, are you going to wind up in jail? No. If you don't do it, yes, we're out of compliance with state law, and state law provides some mechanisms as to the specifics of those and how they work. I'll ask Emily to put together a memo and get it to you certainly before you're asked to make any final decisions on the package.
Yeah, because I know that to some degree we can feel frustrated by the requirements from the state level that we do certain things, and we may not even agree with them, but the state law may. I would like to know what the degree to which we're compelled to do things or figure out a solution to things. And then the second one I wanted to talk about, like Mike, I have also been looking at that piece of property for a number of years up near Madison School. And it would make sense for it to wrap around. But my recollection was that the 2 pieces that would cause you to wrap around, the sellers don't want to sell. They've been talked to several times. They say, no, I don't want to sell. Is it still possible, even knowing that they don't want to sell now, does state law allow you to go ahead and expand the urban growth boundary for those properties designated for future park use, knowing that they're not going to sell? Would state law allow you to do that? In other words, you're projecting, well, we'll eventually make this be a park for us. Would state law say, you got to have a good justification for bringing a piece in and thinking maybe it will happen in the future with an unwilling seller? Would that qualify? Would you be able to do that?
Yeah.
In fact, there are requirements, Mike, to be really direct. You can't bring more parkland in than you need. So it's a situation where we have a demonstrated need, and that need has actually caused you to identify in your parks plans, where we want to go. And this property didn't make it into the plan because it's unlikely to be a public park, at least not as quickly as the land we already own or where we do have a willing seller. So, if you begin comparing the options when there is a need, and it makes more sense in your staff's judgment to identify property that can be a park immediately because it's owned, and can serve the residents that have a demonstrated need for a park. And when you compare that to the other scenario, it's just probably not ripe.
So we might like to have it, but it's just not the right time now because of those kinds of constraints.
Right. Now, if you're considering a longer period of time, say through an urban reserve process, or when you're expanding your urban growth boundary in the future, when you're looking at a longer term need, that may rise to the top, that piece of property. But right now you have better options to serve the limited need that you need to fulfill.
Okay. What I'm getting at is you've been doing a lot of work recognizing what the constraints are of state law. And so far, we've been trusting that you're keeping track of state law so that the recommendations you're making to us are in compliance. But when you get to this 11th hour, you're starting to go, well, can we, shift here? Can we do a little tweak there? Can we modify stuff? And I think what we need to know is what is our legal allowable capability to make little tweaks and torques at the 11th hour within state law? Because it may be that you go, this is our best proposal within state law for what you can do. And if you start tweaking and torquing, you're risking legal ground here.
So I do want to make the point, and just to refresh everybody's mind where you are now, and that is that staff's asking you for a proposal that can be taken through the public process. So, what you decide hopefully today is just going to be, it's a big deal because it begins a very, very labor-intensive process to put together a very large package. That being said, it's a package on which there are going to be a lot of recommendations and information that comes in, and along the way, these what you call 11th hour, in some people's mind, it might feel like hour one. And that's
Granted, good,
right.
Yeah.
And your planning commission may find information or better options they'll recommend to you. So just to be really clear, for public purposes, this isn't the 11th hour per se.
Okay, good. That's a good clarification. I just want to know what makes shaky legal ground and what makes solid legal ground for us as we do this.
I'll just add a super quick piece, which is that there's an analogous situation with the school property. They were able to justify 54 acres out of their total site to bring in at this time. They own additional land, and it's not part of our proposal because it is beyond what's needed for the 20-year planning horizon.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to put the motion on the table.
I move to request that staff prepare an urban growth boundary adoption package that adds approximately 958 acres to Eugene's UGB for jobs, parks, and schools as shown on Attachment A and includes the components listed in Attachment D.
Second.
Moved and seconded. We are about 1 minute out. You want to...
I just want a clarifying question.
I want to ask for an extension of time so that you can get...
Move to
I'll
extend
get it
10 minutes.
on my own. Don't worry about it.
10 minutes.
I withdraw.
Second.
He doesn't need it.
I withdraw.
Okay.
If everybody's ready, but we can just vote, but that leaves no time for any more discussion, and that's up to you guys. Okay.
So, Mayor, before you vote, is George withdrawing his motion?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're voting on the...
Okay, so
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
we're ready to vote on a motion. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In opposition? 2. It passes. Thank you all very much.